we're recording.
Okay. All right, we're back.
Everyone who dialed back in, you're going to get a big surprise. We don't know what it is or when you'll get it.
I mean the right. This is
Something
the encore
good
presentation.
We resolved all tech problems for the rest of the pandemic period while we were offline.
These are for the participants that came back. You are dedicated. Thank you.
Well, can we open it up to them? Maybe we should do a big view. Can we get on the same screen space with them?
I also just wanted to piggyback on some of the conversations folks were having about communication. You know, Carla and Lillian were talking about what's it like when courts open up, and we're of course in New York City eager to hear what that might be like. But to your point, we've gotten so many different orders from the courts as the courts have tried to figure out how to get this really big beast functional remotely, and then, you know, what reopening looks like. And it's been very hard to keep track. There's so many different courts, there's so many different jurisdictions. And one of the things we found was that a lot of our time, especially at the very beginning and still ongoing, has been communicating with existing clients about what's going on. So there's a whole nother layer of information. You know, for our attorneys, about 75% of their time typically is spent on existing cases. So we all talk about intake and new clients, and that's important, obviously, but the work goes on for existing cases. And we were getting more and more calls from existing clients trying to figure out, kind of like every time the president would announce a new immigration idea or what have you. Every immigration client calls, every volunteer on that case calls. So similarly with the courts changing what they're doing, there's not a ton of messaging outward from the courts to non-attorneys. And so we were really the intermediary for a lot of them. So I think the communication piece is so essential, whatever is happening, both for us communicating with clients and for our clients. They don't drive by our office and see we're closed. So I think they actually just have no idea if we're closed or not. So we also had to message through social. And I'm also curious to hear from anybody on the call, the panelists or other folks, if people have used things like Facebook town halls or any other, trying to think about what tech our clients really can access as a way to put information out there, even if it's just, we're open, we can answer questions, the courts are closed, you know, very basic stuff that people really don't have a way to know.
So when that morning when the IRS set that 36-hour deadline for SSD recipients to enter their information so their dependents could get the $500 stimulus payment now, as opposed to next year when they file their 2020 taxes, that's when we did our first Facebook Live. And I have to give props to our advocacy director, Victoria Esposito, who had not planned for that moment, right? And just like the rest of us, was mostly in her nicest t-shirt, right? But so, you know, had to put on decent clothes and do this Facebook Live. And it wasn't long, but that's how we got the point across. And it wasn't viewed by very many people that morning, but it was viewed like 4,000 times later. And did it make a difference? We hope it made a difference, right? We had 36 hours. We called clients and we did this Facebook Live. We've done some town halls that I have loved, we have put them on Facebook. We've struggled a little bit about what was the best technology for curating chats and having it stream on Facebook, right? So trying to be a little bit conscious about the public participation, but also have it be freely available. So sometimes we've used, I think we used Zoom, but we didn't have it streamed quite live, and then we put it up on Facebook. I mean, Facebook, that's the way, man, to reach clients easily. The town halls have been great. We did one on money, we did one on safety, and we did one on housing. And our communications director has really figured out how to leverage it and get press to follow up, and that really gets the word out so much more.
Yeah, we haven't done town halls. Oh, that's a great idea, though. We have used Facebook, and I know that people are seeing it because then we get messenger messages from folks in the community and our website. But that's a great idea, the town hall in certain areas. Just do the video and then post it.
Yeah, we've been recently doing some Facebook Live events. One was huge with like elected officials that wanted an attorney on, and then we did a Spanish language one on immigration recently that also had a really good turnout. Suzanne just put in the chat box, this is something we're looking at to enhance Facebook Live. It works with Zoom, etc., but has extra functions. It's linked to StreamYard.com. So I think, yeah, Facebook Live, I mean, it's new to me. I'm not even on Facebook, but people in my office are, and they're using it effectively to reach clients. So it's a great tool. Do we want to open this up to other, I mean, you diehards who logged back in? Oh my gosh. We're giving you all a prize. I don't know what it is.
Thank you for doing that. I'm so proud of everyone who's here. So I'm not really sure how operable this will be since I now see almost everyone on my screen. I'm not sure if the presentation functions have held up. So why don't we have folks, I think, if you raise your hands, we can call on you and then you can speak to the panel live. We don't have to throw questions just in chat.
Right. And the settings are such that you can unmute yourself. Everybody can unmute yourself if you want to raise a question or make a comment.
So can everybody only see the panelists or can everybody see everybody else?
I think it's just audio. It's not the video. So
Audio, okay.
People can unmute themselves. If you want
Okay.
to unmute yourself and raise a question or make a point, please do.
Yeah, so tell us about your office remote experience or any kind of cool resolutions you've come up with.
Joanne needs to be unmuted. Joanne
Let's see,
Strachan.
let me try to find you really quick. Okay.
You can unmute them all, Chris, maybe. They'll be polite.
And we could call on people, Lillian.
Right.
Oh, I love that.
That could be law school. Judy Whiting.
Does she work with you?
Judy and I used to work together.
Okay.
Strangely enough, I can mute everyone, but I can't unmute everyone. It doesn't look like.
Huh.
We go back to the chat function, put the question in the chat.
Right. And again, if folks want to, we can't force you to be unmuted, but you're now able to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Or if you want to ask a question or make a comment, and if you can't talk, we'll read it out for you.
I wanted to mention one quick thing because I think I'm the only person with a unionized workplace. And when we began more return to work, we involved the union on our emergency response team. So every week that's the one meeting that's continued weekly. We check in, we talk about how the people who have returned to work are doing, and how the new people who will be coming in the next week, what questions they have. It's been pretty smooth. It was a very clean way to get feedback from all staff via the union, one setting, one meeting, very efficient. So a good way to work around it.
Does it have an outside union rep there, Lillian, or is it just your people?
It's my union. It's a rep from our union, not from the big union, not from the local, but from our local, not from the NOLSW.
And I think some folks have figured it out. So we have Michael Roberts and Judy Whiting are both unmuted if you folks want to join in the discussion.
All right, other people can do it too.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. You can't see my cat who's watching this whole thing. I made the mistake of showing him bird videos, and now he thinks every Zoom call have birds. But anyway, I wonder if, this is just a random question, but I wonder if any other program who's on this call has lost staff to COVID, or has had staff lose close family members, because we've certainly had at least 10 people, maybe many more, lose close family members, and we lost a staff member.
Oh,
I guess I'm just curious if we're the only ones out there like that.
that's terrible. Sorry to hear.
Yeah.
Really sorry.
Yeah, that's incredible, Judy. We have had staff members whose whose close family members got sick, they themselves got sick, but I don't think we lost anyone. Actually, that's not true. Somebody lost a brother-in-law during this. Do you know why you had such a high
not
incidence?
lost staff. We have had, go ahead.
I was gonna say, most of our staff live in densely populated neighborhoods. And I think, and we also, our staff member who passed away was not, also did, but we also work in a building that is closed. You can't open the darn windows.
No, we
So
can't
we're
either.
working very hard on figuring out how to do a safe return when you're not in charge of your own freaking airflow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're a tenant, and the owner of your building is under certain obligations now.
I know.
And unfortunately, I regret to say that I read a lot of stuff about this. And
yeah.
I mean, you're entitled to know how they're dealing with your HVAC.
Yeah.
And
we're a commercial, we have a commercial condo, so we're an owner, quote unquote. We've been dealing with the building management, and we're being assured that everything's being taken care of, but it's still scary. But
wow.
Frankly, we had a lot of people whose family live in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, and Queens has really been hit very, very hard.
And you're not alone. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I do know colleagues who've lost staff members in New York City as well. We were lucky we did not lose any staff members, but I know one staff member who lost a close family member who lives out of the country. And of course, she wasn't able to be with family during that time. So New York City's it's a dense community. And if you have staff who come from the highly populated communities, unfortunately, that's a risk.
So we fortunately have not lost any staff members. I know there's one staff member whose wife was exposed. She's a nurse. And I've had a couple of staff members whose partners are doctors, and they've all sort of been quarantined but not sick. We did, however, have a staff member who decided she just couldn't come back to work. Like, she just couldn't deal with it. She can't deal with court. She just decided she's going to retire, and she's done. And you just have to, I guess, respect that. But there was a true fear on her part of even staying home, because she didn't like that either, and she never quite got the hang of any remote work. So she just made that decision. And I don't know if others will follow her.
Can I ask about how you have responded to the murders of Black people, George Floyd and many others, in the middle, while you can't be with each other, right? I just feel like this thing that crushed us, right? Then we got crushed again, right?
Yeah.
So that has also been really hard for us. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we've talked about it. We have our diversity committee that is doing more presentations. They had a lawyers march. I'm like, go do whatever you want to do. Go to the march. Go to the. We are in the process of doing a sign-on to a statement to publish, but it's been hard because it's just hard to have to like know what people need and want. So we're muddling our way through that.
I'm sorry I'm unmuted, but can I just quickly interject that we just got an email saying that the governor has declared Juneteenth a holiday for schools?
Yeah, state holiday.
Is that true?
Yes. So you may
The
want
courts will be closed?
Well, state employees, I don't know. The courts are the courts, right?
Is that
you
this
want to
year or
consider,
next year?
whether you follow suit.
The city bar just closed before the governor's announcement for Juneteenth. And, the city bar is in an interesting position right now because it has its first woman African-American president, Sheila Boston, who's fantastic. And, I think in addition to condemning the killings, it's just, I think we're at like an inflection point, at least with respect to the law firms. where I feel like we receive so many calls and outreaches saying, what can we do in this moment? We want to do more pro bono. We want to give to organizations. What is racial justice? And we're busy trying to explain to people, you know, the work that legal services does is racial justice. You know, the vast majority of our clients are people of color that are low income. And, you know, we put out a statement that said, you know, we provide a life preserver or a life raft, but it doesn't actually move anybody into the middle class. We have, you know, a river of white supremacy in this country that runs very deep. And, you know, we're trying to address some of those issues right now. And but I think we're at a tipping point or an inflection point. And I think messaging that the work that you all do is racial justice work. It's, you know, helping low-income people in this country is helping low-income people of color by and large. And, you know, people should be donating to these causes and volunteering their time. And, you know, they can also and should donate to, you know, other groups. You know, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund was the one that I got asked about most recently. But, you know, there's lots of good groups doing racial justice work. And then there's all the, you know, police accountability work and the bond work. You know, there's these bond funds all over the country now. And our former, I saw McGregor Smythe on here, you know, Robin Steinberg set up one of them and may have been, you know, the model for the ones that came afterwards. You know, it's extraordinary. That was an extraordinary effort, and it's really important. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting moment, but I think it's also an interesting moment to be engaging with the law firms that are on your board and that volunteer with you, and, you know, everybody messaging that, you know, what the work that you all do in the social justice space is racial justice work.
Yeah, I think we obviously work a lot with law firms too, and I thank Lillian for asking the question. We sort of muddled as well, you know, to quote Carla. We have a DEI committee, but that's, you know, this demands more than just that. And so we, when we came out with a statement for the agency, it was actually a way to channel some of the feelings that folks were having into a statement, and the statement came from a place of humility and needing to learn, and also looking at what it means to be a lawyer and be fighting racism, given that there's a racist history to even the construction of the legal system. So it's caused a lot of really interesting conversations for us. And I think you're right, Lynn, a lot of what we do is racial justice in a way, but I think we still have to be really intentional about how we talk about that and how we stay true to that. So for us, for example, we work with women, and the history of the women's movement has not been always a generous and inclusive history in terms of who gets to have a voice in that movement. So just being very explicit about the fact that for us, anti-racism has to work hand in hand with, you know, our work supporting women. And then to your point, working with law firms, you know, the way the law firms talk about some of these issues is very different from the way we talk about them typically. So there are DEI committees and inclusivity committees, et cetera. But I found, for example, that we had a board meeting just last night, actually. And, you know, the fun one where you vote on the budget, whatever, or the proposed, you know, the imagined budget. And we had come up with a statement about Black Lives Matter, and I put it up on the screen on the Zoom call, because I had already sent it to everybody, but I wanted to take a moment to talk about how this is the conversation we're having in the office right now, because I don't know, you know, that's always a little bit of a disconnect with the board. They're well-intentioned and supportive, but they're just in a really different place from where the staff is. And then finally to say, we had a couple moments where we shared and people spoke, and what is really hard doing this remotely, to sort of Lillian's original framing of the question, I think, is that not only do some people you just want to give them a hug and you can't, but also making sure that you're really listening, because everybody needs something different right now. And it did just feel like, you know, the roof had already fallen on us and we were starting to poke our heads back up, and then the roof fell back on top of us. So I think it's been rough, but the good news, I guess, for me is I feel like it's given me permission that perhaps I should have taken before, but if I didn't, it's made it more possible for me to take the permission to say things in certain rooms where I might not have said them as explicitly before, including my boardroom, including, you know, meetings with law firms. And I actually see that as exciting.
I think Sherilyn Eiffel said it. I'm on her Twitter feed. You know, she's the executive director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Anyway, there was this little flap with the Supreme Court where one of the few Black clerks had to speak out when, wasn't the Supreme Court, it was
one of the circuit courts.
It was one of the circuits, and it was one of the very senior judges who had made some just really out of step remarks about the removal of the Confederate statues and, you know, referring to his own family history. And this, you know, young African-American clerk had to take him on. And her Twitter feed on that was like, come on, you know, senior lawyers, step up. You know, this isn't right. Why is this, you know, the newest clerk the one who has to express on this? And to your point, Amy, about, you know, taking that space now to speak out, I think we all have to do it. I mean, we're leaders of, you know, important organizations. We work in close contact with people. And honestly, I do think it's a moment for change. I sense it's a tipping point, and I don't think it's going back. It's not going back to the way it was. And, you know, in the same sense that we're talking about how our offices are going to return to the office, and it's not a conversation about going back to the same way it was, right? We are going to have been changed by this experience.
Right.
And we're all going to be using more remote technology. We're going to be working more remotely. We're hopefully going to be more efficient. But, you know, hopefully we'll be able to serve more clients, since that's the whole purpose, and help more people get access to justice, since that's our goal. But it's a lot of change very, very quickly. And, you know, luckily, I think this, you know, group of leaders and the people in the pipeline in this community are up for the challenge. I'm optimistic.
Yes.
Go ahead, Carla, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
I was agreeing. I was saying I'm optimistic also.
I wanted to recommend, actually, I'm going to bring it back to tech for 1 second, to have this kind of difficult conversation among our staff remotely. Have you guys ever used We Poll Everywhere to run a big meeting? So it's free, magic words, right? And people can text their words, and you get a word cloud, and the more people say something, the bigger the statement is. And we asked 2 questions. How did you feel watching or learning about the murder of George Floyd? And what would you want to see in legal aid statement about Black Lives Matters? And it was very, very powerful and really helpful to the writing of the statement. And the second thing I want to recommend is there's an offering that Dr. Ibram Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, he did a panel thing with, well, it's not exactly a panel, but it was a little talk for the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And it is a way to help understand how legal services and housing and homelessness providers are or can be anti-racist organizations, because so much of our work creates equity, more equitable results for people. And it's just easy. It's very much worth the time. The panelists included John Powell talking to Ibram Kendi. It was cool. So I recommend it. And it was a little bit hard to find, but I know you're all lawyers, and so I'm sure you'll be able to find it. And I'll send you the link if you really can't
What was the software thing?
We Poll Everywhere.
We Poll Everywhere. If you're running a big meeting, man, it is really cool. I don't know, it also frees the people who are shy, right? To say
give them a chance to say.
Yes.
Yeah. Not everybody will talk in a group about it, but if you can ask them, that's a great idea. And then that will start the conversation and to have, great idea.
I also wanted to keeping it on tech, I have found that there's a thing that Zoom can be a real leveler in some ways. So there are pros and cons with Zooming. I think Zooming with this big of a group can be harder, but Zooming with, I don't know, up to 10 people, I found that people speak in that context who might not have spoken in real life. So I think that's actually kind of interesting and can be a little bit helpful. And Zoom, of course, also does allow you to have breakout rooms. So, you know, you can have the whole group together and then break out. So I think there are ways. I'm just learning how to use those tools. But to your point, I'm a huge word cloud fan generally. So my staff already knows that. They're sick of hearing me talk about word cloud. So
I love it.
Have them do this. Yeah. But I think that's a great way to start things off. And then we've been thinking about breaking into small groups that are maybe not the usual small groups, right? So I do usually at our all staff meetings before pre-COVID, PC, I would always do an icebreaker exercise in the office, and part of the goal was to have folks talk to people they don't always talk to. So we've been thinking of reviving that using the breakout room.
Well, that's a good, on Zoom, that's a great idea.
And I just wanted to mention in the chat, we have Ben Chan said that his organization had a town hall. Ben, do you think you could unmute yourself and tell us what that was?
Yeah, sure. So we had a Black Lives Matter town. Thanks. So we had our organization hosted over Zoom Black Lives Matter town hall, and the conversation was unstructured and unfacilitated, and it was invaluable for our staff. I guess I should put this in a little bit of context. So since last year, we hired somebody consultants to come in and do workshops about inclusivity and diversity, because even though most of the clients that we represent are Black and Latinx, that's not reflected in our staff. I mean, our office is a white space, and that's something that I think that for a lot of people it was hard to admit, and it's hard to talk about without having somebody there as a facilitator. But anyway, so So last week we held a Black Lives Matter town hall, and the conversation, I felt that it had to be unstructured, and it had to just be a space where people can talk about what they've been going through, kind of doing this work with the backdrop of what's happening around this country. And we're going to do it again, and we're going to keep on doing it. And I felt that it's just invaluable to just create a space to say, here's the space, and you can talk about it. You can unload, you can share, you can vent about, being a person of color, doing this kind of work where you're providing access to justice for people, and then at the same time being frustrated with the state of what's happening.
Hey, Ben, where do you work, can I ask?
I work at the Center for Family Representation. We're based in New York City.
Yeah. Because do you know about the Diversity Coalition? You can. Okay. All right. Good.
That's an advertisement, Ben.
It's an unsolicited ad. That's right.
That's okay. It's good.
Thank you.
And Lillian, thank you for all your work. You've been on top of the diversity issues in our community for a very, very long time. Yeah. So on the space issues, the City Bar, my office is affiliated with the New York City Bar Association, and for the overall staff of the City Bar and the City Bar Fund and the Justice Center, there was it wasn't a facilitated discussion, but it was a discussion where staff of color shared their experiences at this time, and also LGBT staff with discrimination, and it was in sort of violence, and it was really moving, and I think people really appreciated having the space, even if they personally didn't speak up, but just to hear people in that space. And then someone else who interned for me, who's an African-American male, told me that he had a traumatic incident during the protests where he was called the N-word in a really aggressive way and almost got in a fight with someone, and mentioned it in his corporate office and told them that he needed a mental health day, and they ran it up the chain to the boss's boss, and they ended up doing a 1-hour session where a bunch of Asian American staff also spoke up about the discrimination they've been and the sort of harassment they've been experiencing on the street in response to the anti-Chinese sentiment about COVID. and that it became a real bonding thing for these sort of, you know, software engineer types that, you know, normally don't talk about these things. So yeah.
And Lynn, we have a raised hand from Stephen Goldmeyer. Stephen, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I wanted to say one small thing. I've been involved with this group called Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice. And it's been really helpful to me as a white person who has to account for my own involvement with complicity with white supremacy, just through gain of privilege and being in these kinds of spaces. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of make sure that we're thinking about creating these spaces for people to talk about these issues and what that might mean when they're white-dominated spaces for the people who are not white, for the people who are directly impacted. So for Black folks sitting in a room full of white people saying, I just feel so bad about this, and it's just so hard to see all these images. This might be a time for us to think about what it would mean to create spaces for white folks to really hold each other accountable and create learning spaces dedicated to white people really being honest with each other and open with each other. I just have worked with a lot of my friends at some of my former offices, you know, have said to me, that was a really hard meeting for me because I have to live this every day and none of the people who are talking really do. And it's maybe increasing the strain on the populations we're actually trying to support. So I just wanted to put that out there as something to be thinking about. I think when we're structuring these feedback sessions and things like that, on how to do the work in a way that's responsible and not emotionally draining on the people we're really trying to actively support and stand up for and elevate their voices.
Thanks for sharing that resource, Stephen. Anybody else have comments?
I just wanted to ratify that because I think it's a really important point. We ended up, it was more timing, but we were trying to hear from the staff at a staff meeting, and then it happened to happen right after the George Floyd murder. And so that's what the sharing became about. And one of the things I learned from doing it is that if I were to do it again, I would make it really clear that people could opt out if they wanted to. So, you know, it's not safe or comfortable for everybody to talk about that at work. We often use the phrase like bring your whole self to work, and not everybody wants to bring their whole self to work. So I think, you know, I think that's just a great point, that sharing can be great for some people. Sharing with me might not be great for some people. They might want to share with other people. So just being really mindful of how to do that. And I think Ben said earlier that he'd had a facilitator at one point. I really think that's invaluable because these are tough things to talk about. So trying to figure out the balance between providing support for the staff, but understanding that everybody has different needs at a moment like this, and making sure that brave spaces aren't risky spaces for people is important. So thank you, Stephen, for that. Were you reaching out to someone else, Lynn? I'm sorry, I jumped in, I think.
No, I was silent.
And
you weren't.
I was doing nothing. I was looking at this and deciding, like, when is this over and how are we ending this?
I was going to ask Lynn if you wanted to look over that last group of questions that we got cut off for and see if there's anything else.
I did, but they're all like, where's the link? I mean, do you have any, Rochelle, that you think we should be focusing on?
It is back. It is not a transition. It is an abrupt change. If you want to go back to, I think that at least the last question about what's your view of the future in office.
Okay, why don't we sort of look at some of those, the future looking office. Also, and if people on the call want to answer a sort of crowdsourced question, which is thoughts on tech challenges for clients, what's worked, what hasn't, how are you handling virtual hearings with clients? If you've got thoughts on that, let us know. Okay, so many programs seem to be planning for a hybrid return to work, with some functions staying remote and some returning to offices. You know, how long, Lillian, do you see that going on for? What's your take on that?
Well, originally I thought that the phases would go in 2-week segments, and I assumed that in phase 3, the governor would change some of the limits that he put on offices, professional services, in phase 2, but so far that has not happened. So I think we have decided in the end to change staffing every 3 weeks. And in one setting, that's Teams, that office chose to rotate teams. In the big office in Albany, we're going to gradually increase staff, maybe be back at full staff by September, because we're kind of thinking that's when we're going to get crushed with evictions, and that we're going to need to be near to the city courts. A week ago, we got a docket for one of the city courts in one of the more remote counties, and we had to deal with that. So it is going to be slow, and we are waiting for a little bit more guidance because it's a very, even the client visitor guidelines, right? It's very cumbersome, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to see and keep in touch with people every couple of weeks about how it's going. It's funny because people came back to the big office in Albany. We have these biweekly support group meetings, and I know I don't usually go, but I went to one, and they talked about how weird it was being in this mostly empty office. So all the reasons maybe that you wanted to come back to work, like, right, to be with people you weren't married to or gave birth to, right, like a break. As it turned out, you went to this big office that was mostly empty or people with their doors closed, right? So they could take their mask off. They could take their mask off in their office, right? But they can't take their mask off in the common areas. And we had to pack up all the furniture, the conference room, the kitchen. It's not the office you might have been dreaming of. That's all. Right, so.
Anybody else have thoughts, Carla?
So I told my staff that I didn't think we would be even close to all back until after January. So if we are before then, surprise, but I don't know that we will be. I think that a lot of people are very concerned about what's going to happen in September when their kids go back to school. I have a very young staff, and you know, they're like, how do we manage this? I'm like, well, you'll just work from home, just keep working from home. You know, like landlord tenant, I see when that opens up, I see perhaps the housing unit has to be there, but maybe the rest of them don't. So I don't think we'll go past 50% in the fall unless something changes. And I don't see us being all back there until sometime we see whether there's a second wave. I mean, the other issue is we've now learned that we can stay connected remotely. And so maybe it'll be a year before we have a full live in-person staff meeting or happy hour or summer picnic or something. I don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, I think the social aspect of the office is the sad part of what people are feeling that they're losing. And then we want to go back to the office because we want to be with the people that are there, except for there aren't any people there. You're right. There is no social aspect to being in your office. You're sitting in your office with the door closed. The only thing you're maybe getting is silence from whatever is going on in your home.
You have better technology at the office. You do.
Yeah,
right?
you do. Except for now they're all going to have really good laptops.
Can I just ask then an ugly question? At the end of this year, how will you feel about the traditional metric, one of the metrics we use to measure, for lack of a better word, productivity, cases closed, cases opened? How are you going to feel? We're already over 1,000 cases down from this time period last year. More than 1,000 down. And that's partly the function due to diminished intake, right? During the, the first
closed
2
down.
months.
People didn't call.
But we believe there's going to be a spike, right? And I don't actually believe that people can serve all the people who are going to be accessing our services during a spike from their kitchen table. I just don't believe it. Yeah. Sorry, I am a boomer.
I don't know if it's right. We don't know. I mean, I think it's a question of being flexible and nimble. Like as quick as we were to be able to figure out how to be home, we have to figure it out as it comes because we don't really know. Like, okay, while we're having this conversation, I've gotten 10 different text messages about whether or not the courts are closed on Friday. Who's heard what? Who hasn't heard? Are they closed? Are they open? Are they what? I'm like, okay, stop texting me. We'll have to figure it out later. But somebody say something like, don't tell us Friday morning, oh, by the way, we closed the courts today. You know, don't tell us Friday, oh, we're going to open everything up on Monday. I'm hoping. So I hope we have a little bit more lead time, but some of this has got to be planning and then seeing really what goes on and what we do. We may all go back in September, and October 1st, a second wave comes and we're all home again. I don't know.
That's also a good point. I mean, I think so much of the organizing is sucking up resources that would otherwise be, spent serving clients. There's both our intake was down, and we run a very large remote legal hotline. So that intake was related to clients not calling. And so I think there was a shutdown period where the clients were just not, they were focused on family health matters and their own concerns and getting enough food without getting exposed and going to jobs and whatever else they had to do. So I think they were down for that reason. And then I think, taking up the experienced lawyer time in the office with, having to figure out, is the court open? That stuff is going to make us less efficient until, we sort of have that straightened out. So I think all of us are going to do fewer cases this year. And there's actually a debate going on in our office about whether people are working more efficiently, because a lot of staff feel like, thank God I don't have to spend an hour and a half on the subway and I have so much more time and therefore I'm working more. But it's not clear to me whether that's going to translate into doing more cases or whether people are just, logged in more because they're having trouble letting go. So I think, I think this is going to be a very choppy year. And I think, all the funders and everybody else who supports our work just, has to realize it's been an extraordinary effort to get these programs up and running remotely, and then to work with the court system during this period. And basically, as I've been saying on pro bono, we're sort of building it as we're going, right? Like it's changing how we do pro bono work, which is only a very small piece of the legal services delivery system, but it is a piece that's got to be rethought like everything else because it's all moving remote, and they're all remote. So we're really rebuilding a lot of this, and hopefully the end point is going to be offices that can sort of toggle efficiently between remote and in office. And if there is a second wave, we're going to be better able to do it. And we can't completely get rid of, whatever it is that we, came up with to use in this period. But Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about where you think the work is going future-wise?
Sure. I mean, again, we're, we're more like you, Lynn, in that we're a hybrid. We're not doing direct services much. We don't have as many clients coming in the front door. I think we're going to go back to the office very slowly because I don't think we need to go back fast. So why do that to anybody? It gives us the opportunity to see if there is a second wave and what the impact of that is. And then, as I said before, because we're in New York City, the subways are everything. And so I really do think that one thing we're looking at is we do a lot of advice and counsel because when folks call us, sometimes they're placeable for a pro bono matter. Sometimes we take them and sometimes it's an advice and counsel scenario. So we're looking at doing a texting advice and counsel, like a texting bot on our website, partly just to respond to folks who can't travel so they can communicate with us. We want to make sure that we still think that's quality service. And so we're not 100% sure what that will look like. But for the future, what that might do is kind of peel off the folks who just need a referral or need some advice and counsel to start and let us focus more of our deep time on the people who need representation. So we are trying to think about ways to make sure we can direct the deep energy we have at the folks who need that deep energy. So that's all a work in progress, but that's something that might go forward. Like Lillian, I'm really concerned about the uptick. We don't do housing, but I mean, the family stuff has been on hold and like crises are building and then suddenly the courts are going to open up. So our existing cases are going to explode with work, and we're going to have new people who are new people who need legal services, right? Folks who might not have been in that situation before through job loss, health crisis, what have you. So there's this sort of fake lull right now where it's not like we're not busy. I think we all feel overwhelmingly busy, but work is taking a little longer than it used to. We're adjusting. So there is that stuff that's eating up more time. And then I think the actual legal work is going to be pretty substantial in the fall. So I guess for us, I think you know, only going to the office when you need to go to the office. I think the phased entry, and, you know, I hope that Lillian and Carla and other colleagues can let us know what you learn through a phased entry, right? Like when we left, like everybody said, we kind of just popped out really quickly. And so now we're learning what is doable remotely. When we get back in the office, we might be better able to say, oh, right, this is like literally half the time when I do it here, and kind of be able to do a more conscious comparison, and then really limit in office to what has to be done in office. But then, as I said before, the longer term analysis is real estate footprint and what can clients do remotely? How can we help them do more remotely? If this is the way of the world going forward, we don't want that to be another reason why our clients are getting left behind, because they don't have that remote access that the private sector has. And I would like to think it's opportunities for more partnerships with the private sector, you know, more resources to give tech support, more funding for tech support for us and for our clients. Because I am really concerned that, I mean, most of our clients have some level of intelligent phone, right? I don't know if they're smart, but they're not stupid phones, but not everybody. It's not universal. They don't all have Wi-Fi. You know, many of them are living in situations where there are many people in the home. They can't have a confidential communication. So that isn't going away without additional thought and resources. So I think of it together. I can't think about my office without also thinking about where are the clients coming from and how are we going to talk to them.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I just want to ask John Greiner if he has any closing tech tips for us.
Well, you know, thank you. I think you've covered a lot of sort of the basic technologies. I think overall, being nimble, as you've talked about, meaning that we're not investing in technology that's office bound for sure. That's not tailored to be so unique that it's hard for staff to learn or for clients to use. I think maintaining some governance over your client data and you know, confidential conversations, but also all the data we collect from our clients. We've certainly seen that in New York State and nationally an uptick in malicious you know, behavior by bots and hackers and stuff. So I think security is also going to be something we got to continue to up our game, and it will come at some inconvenience to users, and it's going to come at some cost. But I think you know, we have that moral obligation, ethical and moral obligation to provide our clients also that, you know, the security and confidentiality. I think I've done just a fabulous job, you know, talking through so many of the technologies, the VoIP technologies that are going to make, you know, these hotlines. You know, some programs already had virtual hotlines, but your hotline's more accessible. The online intake systems that are already up there. So there's been a lot of investment over the last, you know, 5-6 years that I think has made the move a little bit easier for most organizations. And probably as you're talking, it's going to accelerate certain other moves, like for instance, away from desktops and to laptops or tablets. But I think you're all on the money. This is you know, consistent with what we're seeing working with the community.
Okay, thank you so much, Rochelle.
I'm just going to interject because we're coming up on the 4 o'clock hour, and I'm just going to thank all of our amazing panelists. Lynn, thank you so much. Lillian, Amy, and Carla, and John. I've lost my co-host, Chris, but I also want to thank our attendees who came back with all of our trouble, which is a testament to how wonderful our panelists were. I thought the discussion was fantastic, and I learned a lot, and I think people probably learned things that they want to go back to their own organizations with. So I just want to say the recording or recordings, because there'll probably be 2 now, will be posted on the IOLA and Permanent Commission websites. And I want to give another plug that this was our last webinar in our weekly tech support series, Lucky 13. But we are now focused on our New York State Civil Legal Aid Technology Conference that I expect to see all of you at October 7th and 14th. So save the date. And again, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
This was awesome. Thanks for
Stay
staying.
safe, everybody.
Sticking around.
Thank you.
Bye.
Again.
Bye.
Thank
You're
you.
all awesome.
Hopefully the 4 of you will do a panel at the conference virtually, because I think we got to get the band back together.
I'm all for it. Great idea.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.